Good evening. You are now joining me with Talks with Professor Amber. I am going to have an interesting lecture to share with you this evening about the Native American people and what horrific actions we took against them as the American government. Um, we will be looking into the perspectives of both the Native American people, including the five major tribes, and also the perspective of the American government at the time with Andrew Jackson. Now, I want to open with a thought. From the earliest settlements in America, Americans have always had very high tensions with the Native American people. For whatever exact reason it started, maybe historians will never know, except for that the Native Americans posed a threat to the American settlers, which seems ironic since the American settlers, were the ones who had more advanced weaponry. So why they always felt that they were a threat, who knows? As time progressed from pre-revolution to post-revolution, there is a common theme of propaganda against the Native Americans, which during that time became more and more intensified. Now let's just take a look at John Winthrop. He began to use the language referring to the Native Americans as devils or demon savages. If we look at another American literature author, like Mary Rowlandson, she was actually held captive or kidnapped by the Native American people during King Philip's War, and she wrote a narrative on her experience, which also additionally made the Native Americans out to be just these savages. So through the literary works of these authors to newspaper articles or cartoons, political cartoons, the Native Americans were portrayed in this certain light to the American settlers. So, unfortunately, how America started, we started on these firm ideals of the pursuit of happiness and liberty. So, unfortunately, our Constitution and Declaration of Independence did not extend to them. They were the only ones who were really kind of cast off to the side and not accepted into that ideal, even though they accepted European immigrants who were not born in America the exact same way. They were protected under the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. So let's begin to dig a little deeper into some historical resources, shall we? There were 5 prominent tribes: the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and the Seminoles. Now, from the time that the government was established, they started creating all sorts of treaties with the Native American people, all 5 tribes, and probably other tribes as well, in order to avoid conflict with white American settlers and the Native Americans. They really wanted to keep those two people apart. Now, it was assumed that these treaties were voluntary, which they were, and the Native American people did agree to move and were removed from their homeland to other areas, like we saw with down in Georgia. But you could probably say that they were very intimidated into it. Now, one of these exchanges that we're going to talk about today was the ones where they had created the treaty with having them in Georgia, and then there was the discovery of gold suddenly, and American settlers were very interested in getting on this Indian land, and so they tried to create another treaty which would exchange the Indian lands east of the Mississippi and would give them all of the land west of the Mississippi. And that could be contributed to President Monroe and Congress at the time. Uh, and really, the whole motive behind that was ultimately greed. And while they created this treaty, the Cherokee resisted, and the Cherokee really gave politicians a taste of their own medicine by creating a formal Cherokee Nation constitution and took them to court, which went all the way to the Supreme Court, which, after Supreme Court ruled the case with the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, they found that the Cherokees were right, that they ruled in favor of them. However, after the Supreme Court ruling, we find that the Georgia government still encroached on their rights per the treaty that they had created. And they went ahead and created a new boundary where settlers then began their search for gold, which was just totally against their original treaty. So the Native Americans really felt like that the American people were really just hypocrites. And they continued to try and resolve this conflict by appealing to their own logic, just like the American people did with King George, trying to appeal to him logically to make amends without any conflict. So that's the point of view from the Indians, the Native Americans, excuse me, at this point. But let's look at another point of view, which was with the American people at this point, the government. So, with Indian removal being something that seems just so morally wrong to us now, how did the American people justify their actions? From the perspective presented by Andrew Jackson in his second address to Congress, here were some of his points, which were unfortunately agreed with the other members of Congress and other politicians. So one reason why Indian removal again and breaking this treaty would be beneficial both for the Indians and for the American people is that he thought it would strengthen the southwestern frontier and really would be a betterment for the American people as a whole. That if it came to be wartime and they had their coasts being raided, that they would have land to be able to fall back on, or that there could be just more agricultural land as well, since this was a very agrarian-centered society. He also believed that Indians, the Native Americans, would be farther separated from contact with the white settlers, and that would enable them to pursue happiness in their own way, i.e., they wouldn't have a government of this other entity breathing down their necks, that they would be free to do all the savage things that they like, which they were also hoping that this new treaty would encourage them to cast away all their savage ways, that they would become civilized and they would settle down in cities instead of roaming the plains. Andrew Jackson also argued that this time it would be a fair treaty, that it would be permanent. He quotes, "Their existence may be prolonged and perhaps more perpetual if they did this." And he concedes at one point that they're ripping these Native American people from their homes, and he also concedes that it would be very emotionally painful. And so while he acknowledges this point, he also rebuts it with, didn't the forefathers leave everything that they knew in search for a better life? They left the comfort of their own homes, their own country, and went somewhere where they had no clue what was before them. And I have a quote that I want to read straight from the text. "And can it be cruel in this government when, by events which it cannot control, the Indian is made discontented in his ancient home, to purchase his lands to give him a new and extensive territory, to pay the expenses of his removal, and support him a year in his new abode? How many thousands of our own people would gladly embrace the opportunity of removing to the West on such conditions? So they viewed the removal of the American people to the West, that this would be a dream come true, the American dream, that they would have this opportunity to better their lives. He finishes in the seventh speech to Congress that it could be solemnly sworn that this new land that would be set aside for the Indians shall be forever secured and guaranteed to them, in which the white settlements are not to be pushed. This would be the final straw. They would not encroach on their territory ever again. This would be permanent, and this would be good. However, I want to finish this lecture today with a little somberness, as we're looking back, that this was apparently not true. In fact, we would see it repeated multiple times towards this group of people. And the second the American government held prejudice towards this specific minority of people and justified the removal of these Indians in lands that they negotiated to open and give to them, that they opened a gateway of one of the most atrocious persecutions seen in our history. And I'm not just saying that because I'm part Chickasaw. Until next time.